So, welcome, Nicole, to Disabled and Proud. How are you today?
I'm doing great. It's Friday. We're recording on a Friday afternoon, so looking at the weekend coming up.
Yeah, I know. I actually can't wait for this weekend. This is the first weekend that I've not done something in a while, so I'm gonna really enjoy doing nothing.
You can totally introvert. You can binge TV shows. You could read a book. You could
Yeah, I know. So many options, so many things that I could do. The first question that I like to ask every single guest, and I'll say it because I like to think that as disabled people, we all refer to our disability completely individually, is how do you refer to your disability?
Yeah. So I personally just love the word disability and as kind of the greater community that I'm referring to.
Yeah.
But for me, what my disability is I am an amputee. So I was born without my left hand, but a little more specifically than that, I'm what's called a congenital amputee. So the difference in terminology there is congenital means from birth, but you also will see a lot of amputees walking around the world who are traumatic or acquired amputees. And those are, of course, amputees who, for one reason or another, have lost a limb due to some sort of accident or injury or illness. So yeah, congenital amputee is what I like to call my disability.
Yeah. And have you always used that like terminology, or has that been something that you've developed like over time and as you've maybe got a bit older?
It's definitely as I've gotten older and met people in my community and learned the language of our community, that's the terminology I've taken on. Just growing up, I would call it like, oh, my nub or my little arm, or there were kind of nicknames for it that weren't as kind of like streamlined language wise until I like plugged into community and understood what the greater community was calling their body.
Yeah. And as you were born with your disability, much like me, that experience from going from being a disabled child to being a disabled adult, I find such an interesting transition. And I was wondering if you could tell me a bit about your own journey with that.
And yeah. Yeah. I mean, I grew up in a really, really small town, right? So I was in a bubble, and I was in a bubble that was also set in a time period that was the 90s. So before the internet existed, which means that my parents, their access to education and their access to resources was really limited. So I never saw people like me. I was very special in my hometown because I was the only one who had a body variation like mine. So growing up, the attitude was, yes, I knew I was special, but also the attitude that was taught and taken on was, Nikki, you're no different. And that messaging was really pounded hard into me, like, you're no different, you're no different, you're no different. And yet the older I got, the more I was knocking into all of these experiences that was causing a ton of cognitive dissonance because I was being told I was no different. And yet, you know, I would encounter a random person on the street wanting to like pray over my body or something, you know, like things that are not the same as everyone else. So I'm thankful for that time and the growing up in the bubble, because I feel like that really allowed me to experiment in a safe space. So I got to try a ton of activities. I was in every school activity you could imagine and felt safe and confident enough to do that because my little bubble was very little. So I knew everyone participating, which means they knew me. And I kind of got to blend and be a part of it in that way. But things started to shift later on, and I'm sure we'll get to that.
So I think it's so interesting, particularly as being disabled children, because I think there is such a difference between being a disabled child and then transitioning into being a disabled adult. Because I think when you are a disabled child, I think everybody around you wants the best for you, no matter what. And what you said about, you know, being told that you're no different, you're no different, and you're no different, is, it rings true for, I'm sure, for so many people who have had the same experience. And you almost get like a different level of attention because everybody wants to make sure you're safe, secure, and that you're happy in what you're doing. But then you transition into adulthood and that same attention kind of disappears. And the attention, if you do get like more attention, it's more like intrusive in terms of it's staring, or it's people looking and they want to know why and how. And because you're not like this cute little child anymore, it feels very, very different. And I think what you said about having some cognitive dissonance is it rings so true, because the experiences that you have and what you're told are two very, very different things. And I love that that's where we are now at this conversation, because it rings so true. And the words are exact, because that's exactly what it's like.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, I mean, to your point, everyone around me, you know, my parents are the people who love me most in the world. Like, they were just doing what they thought truly was best for me.
Yeah.
Without having any understanding whatsoever at all about what it was like to live in my body, right? Like, sure, there were instances where, you know, someone would say something to me, ask me questions about my body, and they would be around, but they didn't have to live in my body all of the time. So it's like they didn't understand even how to have the conversation with me. They didn't understand the language. They didn't even understand how to train me how to talk about those things when they happen in real time, because they had no idea either. So, I mean, that type of conversation is now, for me, like, I feel a huge responsibility to the next generation of kiddos to make sure that they understand, and the adults around them understand what that conversation should look like and what the reality of those differences actually are as you're growing up. So that way we can actually explain it to the kids. Like, you're right, it's not normal that person just paused and wanted to pray over your body. That's actually, you know, let's talk about that. That's a common microaggression that happens to all of us. So hopefully we can get that education and that support going for both the young kiddos and the parents that support them.
And I think, like, going back to what you said earlier about how, you know, you were born and you were growing up in the 90s and your parents didn't have access to that education. Like, social media has played such a massive part in education for so many people, particularly parents of disabled people, because, like, I know countless parents follow my account, and like at one point I was like, why are you following me? Like, what am I going to bring into your life? And then I was like, oh, like, your child has the same disability as me. Like, oh, like, no, they're going to be so fine. Like, it's all okay. But like, you didn't know that before you come across me.
That's right. Yeah. And they are like, I think it's a really interesting time, because you're exactly right. Like, social media is connecting a lot of people, but we also haven't had the chance to really build a lot of resources to serve the people who are finding us either. And there's also a shift in, like, whose voice are you listening to? Like, are you listening to other parents and how they're telling you to take care of your disabled child? Or are you tuning in to those who live with a disability and actually have had that lived experience? Or, you know, there's lots of silos that you can tune into. And I think I think we're getting better and better and better about, like, what that messaging should be and how to kind of curate it and synthesize it. But it's still hard. It's still really hard.
For sure. And what I really like about having these conversations is that sometimes disability plays into the career path that you take, and sometimes it doesn't. And I was wondering for you, how did your journey to what you do now, how did that begin? And how did your disability, like, present itself in these situations?
You mean as far as, like, what I do as my job every day?
Yeah, like, how did you go on the path that you're on now? Like, where did that begin, and how did that journey, and what did it look like?
And alive. So I currently, it's just so, like, when I explain my adult life to people, they're like, that doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, well, you have to live in my body to understand, I guess. So my current position is I work in operations for actually a prosthetic manufacturing company. So I, every single day, am thinking about, talking about, and serving the amputee community. It is my everyday, right? but that wasn't how it started for me at all.
Yeah.
Like if you would have told my college going 20-year-old self that this would be where I'm at 10 years later, like I wouldn't have believed that I'd be like working for a prosthetic company.
Yeah.
But kind of in a nutshell, what happened in my experience specifically is that I was always a theater kid growing up. I loved being on stage. I think a piece of that looking back is that it was a way for me and my different body to control the stares that I was inherently receiving anyway.
Which
but
makes sense because it feels like you can direct where the staring is going.
That's right. And I can impress you with the performance that I'm giving you, right? So I have control over your thoughts around me in a positive way versus maybe a way that's pity or I feel sorry for you or, whatever.
Yeah, completely.
Right. So, I mean, looking back, I think that's a big piece of the theater puzzle for me in particular.
Yeah.
But I went away to school and I actually got my degree in directing and theater management. So it was my dream to go live in New York and to work on Broadway shows. And so right out of college, I moved to New York City and I started working backstage a Broadway show and was on a career path to do like management work within that space, within the theater space. However, what became too hard for me to ignore was the fact that I wanted to be on stage, right? Like I still wanted to be in the middle of it, literally.
Yeah.
But I literally did not think that that was an option because I had never once seen a body like mine on a stage.
Right.
Literally never once. So I ended up finding a loophole, and that loophole was pageantry. So in the pageant world, your literal job is to interview and try out being yourself. Like all you have to do is show up as yourself. And I was like, that's great, I can do that. And also you want me to sing a song, even better. So I ended up going the pageantry route and ended up competing and winning the title of Miss Iowa, which is the state here and the states that I grew up in. And that's a year-long job. So I went to compete at Miss America. And that journey was wild for me because what happened was when I won and actually went to Miss America, there was so much focus from the world on the fact that my different body was showing up in a space that's very much a box. Like when you think of these pageants, it's very much a box of a person that is going to those spaces. And it freaked me out. Nobody had taught me the history of disability. Nobody had taught me, why it was a big deal that a body like mine was showing up on that stage. Like, no, I had not had any of the foundational education in my community. So instead, the experience for me was really, really traumatic. I just sank into myself and sank into anxiety and sank into depression and didn't understand what was happening. So coming out of that, it was like, what I realized was cool. It's really cool to be a part of the disability community. Where are my mentors? Where are the books I can read? Where's the correct messaging on what my body is and how the world reacts to it? And really was able to feel empowered in that way. But at the same time, that literal experience of going on that journey and going to Miss America and experiencing that set my life on a completely different trajectory. So immediately afterwards, after that year of work, I continued on just speaking full time. I spoke full time for like 3 years, and then kind of continued on into different disability spaces and have landed here in a prosthetic world, which has been a really good fit for me. But it all was from that like trauma of trying to figure out what the hell the world was doing and talking about me and what is happening and why didn't anybody teach me these things. So I hope that made some sort of sense. I tried to keep it short.
Yeah, no, it does. And I would love if you're okay to talk about a bit more about the whole Miss Iowa, Miss America journey, because I think what you said is that when you said you didn't feel like you were equipped with the knowledge, but also you didn't understand why the world was taking such an interest in you. how was that, like, how was that experience? Because I can only, in my head, obviously, like, I'm obviously from the UK. Pageants here are not as big as they are in America. Like, that type of life you don't really hear about it. You don't really see about it. And I was
It's a good thing.
wondering, like, for from my like very limited knowledge of that world, it very much seems to be like a type of person that fits into it. It tends to be like skinny, like probably blonde, probably white, which is what we both are. So I'm doing a really good job of explaining right now. But generally, like a very beautiful person then goes on to make themselves even more beautiful for show. And in my head, that's what it is, right? And it's true. I've never seen another body that looks like mine on that stage. So for you, what was that like? What was that experience like?
It was crazy. Yeah, wild. It was really hard because
Yeah.
up until this point, the messaging to me
Mm-hmm.
was, you are no different. So
Yeah.
the fact that I went from winning this title, and here's the thing is because I'd grown up in my body, I realized that there would be conversation around my body. I realized that it was going to be a piece of it, because it's always going to be a piece of whatever I'm doing.
Yeah.
But the extent to what it became, I had no understanding of. So I went from winning one night to literally being like world news the next day. And that really freaked me out because,
Yeah.
first of all, I didn't understand the way that news outlets talked about us. So that was one layer. Like,
Yeah.
every single story that was printed all around the world was, how inspiring is it that this girl with a different body is going to Miss America, right? It's the us versus them messaging, where it's that pity piece of it. I competed right alongside all of these other girls and feel like I won fair and square. I'd like to believe that.
Yeah.
And yet the focus is how inspiring it is, and how
Well done you for living your life. Like,
well done.
job.
Good for exactly. And so that was very confusing to me. Like, I've since come to learn that type of messaging within the news media is, called inspiration porn, where
Such a great and awful term all at once, isn't it? Like, because it does exactly what it says on the tin,
it
but it's so
synthesizes it
harrowing.
exactly. It is. So I've since learned that, but like, that was a confusing layer. Like, nobody was there to come alongside me and be like, this is a thing that people do to us, and here's what it means. And yeah, so in reality, like, looking back on it, what that experience should have been was, instead of those inspiring messages being written about me, the news should have been writing, why is it that it's taken these pageant competitions until the 21st century to get a body with this variation on the stage? Like, what are the barriers that are clearly in place because we don't see other people like this on the stage? And also, there was nobody there to explain to me that, like, inherently me just stepping on that stage was a big deal. Like, it was. But so I felt that pressure, but in a way that nobody was there to like educate me or teach me about. So I felt really, really, really singled out. I felt by the Miss America organization really, really used. I was a marketing tool for them, just to advertise, and that really sucked. And just all around felt really treated differently than everyone else, and just didn't know how to make sense of it, and didn't have a community surrounding me, because what I had been told was, I'm no different, instead of leaning into, no, I'm different, and that's okay, but like, here are the realities of that. Like, I'm, I hope that kind of made sense.
No, and it does, because I think, like you said before, like, you didn't necessarily have like the community of people that were going to be the people that would help explain things to you that actually, like, average Joe blogs or the non-disabled community don't understand. because there are differences, right? There are differences. And this is not to single out like any minority group, but there are differences between being disabled and not being disabled. And there are some things that are unwritten and unsaid. And there are other things that are just so glaringly obvious that they smack you in the face. But if you don't know what you don't know, how are you going to know? Plain and simple. And to go through that almost like all by yourself, and to have like, you know, really mixed emotions. Like on the one hand, it's incredible that you are on this world stage and you are doing something that is, you know, benefiting so many people. However, on the other hand, you feel like you're being singled out and you can't necessarily understand why. Like no wonder it was such a like, you know, you said yourself it was traumatic. Like no wonder, because there is so much cognitive dissonance between you can do what you want to do, and then it's like, oh, like, well done. And you're like, what? Like, I'm just living my life. Why is that interesting to you?
Why? And why does it have to be this messaging? But yeah, like that cognitive dissonance is like, I feel like the thesis for the lives we live. It's just like messaging has been over here and reality that we're bumping into is over here. And it just like never makes sense. Like it always is, wait a second, that felt wrong. That felt not normal. But what actually was that? Like what just happened? And there's been nobody to come alongside us and explain that to us. So, you know, I feel like in my adulthood, that is what I feel the really serious sense of responsibility in, is like trying to like teach the language of what that is to everybody, literally everybody. And just like, let's yell into the void to everybody.
Exactly. And you said, you know, for you, it was like dialing in and finding that community. What did that experience look like for you?
Yeah, I think I had a really unusual launching point into that because of the Miss Iowa, Miss America experience. Like, I mean, it was such an inciting incident. That's why I still talk about it so much, is because my life just shifted so drastically with the experience. But with that experience, you know, it's a year-long job that you're given. So that means that for a year, I was invited to go to every single camp and gathering of limb different kiddos here in the States. And I went to them all of them. And that was amazing. It was amazing because there I was seeing in real time, not only the kiddos, who I just love kids in general. So add on to the fact that like they're little one-handed kiddos or little, you know, like amputee kiddos. And that makes me really excited. But also the parents, but also the peers, like getting to meet people like me in real time too, or people who are older than me who could be mentors to me. Like it really was kind of a slingshot into whether I liked it or not, whether I was feeling it or not that day. Like it was literally my job to go to those things. And I'm very, very, very grateful, and can now see how weirdly lucky I was to like have that full-on experience that in that year, where it just was like, you're gonna meet all the people, ready, go meet them all.
You're literally diving in at the deep end and being like, swim.
And here we go. And those are people who are, you know, so many of those people continue to be like family to this day, so many years later. So it's the community was the saving grace, and all of it. It really was. Just as we're talking and reflecting, like when you hear your experience in somebody else's story, it's so, what's the right word? Validating, because it's like, oh, other people experience this. Like, oh, it's there's language like for this. Yes, it is. Yes, I would agree. So
yeah, because I think quite often, and like we've said this before, and I'm going to repeat it because I think it needs to be repeated, is that you are told, or you can be told so often, that you can do whatever you want to do and that you're no different. However, there is, you know, the outside world does say something completely different, and like that's okay, but we need to somehow marry the ideas of social expectations and social norms and things that we say to disabled people, so that actually this idea that yes, you can do whatever you want to do, just bear in mind it will look different to average Joe blogs, but that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but you don't get told that.
You don't get told that. And also, nobody talks to us about the fact that socially, structures have been built to keep us out.
Yeah.
So like, yes, maybe we can adapt and do it, but like, for example, even me secretly wanting to act and be on stage, the theater community has been built here in the States to keep me out. If I walked into an audition room anywhere here, I would be laughed out of the room. I can't audition for those parts. Those parts are for two-handed people. That's not my fault. I can literally do it, but also that is barriers that have been put in place. And so nobody talks about that with us. Like, there are literal structures put in place that are keeping us out. Like, we have to break those. That's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work and it's tiring, but actually when you have these conversations and you're able to like pinpoint where the barriers are and explain as to why it's a barrier, and you kind of see someone else's like head turn, or they can understand your point, you're like, oh, I did a good thing. Like, I'm a clever
being. I did my good deed for the day.
Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah, totally.
So I like to ask everybody, and I keep repeating this, I've really got to sort it out, but I like to ask everybody, do they have a piece of advice for a younger version of themselves, but also for a younger person with the same disability as them? And quite often these can be like two separate pieces of advice, because mine is definitely two separate pieces of advice.
I like it. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to take them one at a time, so it'll be a surprise whether they're the same or different, because I don't know. I think for myself, I really, really wish that someone had taught me body autonomy. Like, my parents were really, really good to not make my disability shameful.
Yeah.
You know, if anybody asks a question, you answer it, and you answer it because what is there to be ashamed of? You were born differently and it is what it is. Yeah. However, there are days where my body is my own and I don't need to answer people's questions who just want to ask me questions. Yeah. So I really wish that empowerment of my own autonomy and my body being my own would have been taught alongside. And also, it's not shameful. Like, you also can talk about it too, but like, if you don't want to talk about it, you also don't have to.
Yeah.
And I would also tell that to the younger generations. But I also think for the younger generations, I would really also want them to know, like, to teach them the language. Like, you know, like, nobody taught me words like microaggression, or what is disability history, or what is like just pride and plugging into our community. I feel like has done so much for just me being okay with who I am, and me just having peace with what my body is in this world, in the context of where we're at right now and how people react to me. Yeah. So just like trying to like get that information to them feels really, really important to me.
Yeah, and I would agree about, you know, younger generations, because I think for those of us who didn't necessarily grow up immediately on social media, like, social media's, like, let's be real, it's only really become a massive thing in the last maybe 10 years. I mean, yeah. I think about 2012. Oh my God, I can't believe that was 10 years ago. But right? Social media wasn't actually that big then. And the ideas and the community that you can build on social media and like plug into that community and understand, you know, a bit more about the community. If you don't necessarily know loads, like, don't feel like you failed because you don't know, because you don't know what you don't know until somebody either shows you or points you in the right direction. And that's the whole idea of community, right? Is to help someone else out.
Yes, fully agreed.
And so, like, having that ability to be like, guys, like, if you feel a bit like lost, like, it's totally fine, like, check this out, or listen to this talk, or read this book. You know, there are so many, what's the word I'm looking for, there are so many pieces of information out there that you can delve into, and so many pieces about history and, you know, about your own community that you can find, and you can develop your own sense of identity through that, which is like, I didn't have that when I was like 12. Like,
right. I
like,
mean, I want to ask you all of the questions that you asked me to like hear how similar but different it was to my experience, you know?
yeah,
Like,
sure.
did what felt the same and what felt different about what I shared about my growing up?
So I think like I had quite a similar experience that I didn't live in like a small town necessarily, but like I was told the exact same, like you can do whatever you want to do, like that you're no different, all of this kind of stuff. And like I always knew I was disabled. For me, it wasn't like, oh, am I disabled? Am I not disabled? Like I always knew I was disabled, and I was very, very happy in that. And I've never had any issues surrounding being disabled. I think what really threw me was that as you get older, like, and I had this conversation with Jem Turner, who was on this podcast, who's a really good friend of mine, and what she said, and as soon as she said it, I was like, oh my god, like I hadn't even thought of that, but now you said it, it makes so much sense. Is that when you are a disabled child, you get loads of attention, and it's all positive attention, right? There's not really all that much negative attention. Positive attention from like teachers, whether it's medical professionals, like whoever, they want to help you. They want you to have like the best, most fulfilling childhood, because at some point they believe that because you're disabled, there's going to be something missing from your childhood, which is just the biggest load of shit I've ever heard in my entire life. Different conversation for a different day. But when you transition into adulthood, that attention changes. And I hadn't really thought about that actually until I was like, oh, that's so true. Because the attention does change. No longer are you this like marvelous creature in creation. It's a bit like, oh, like you're different. Like, why are you different? And I also didn't necessarily realize that being disabled and being confident don't come hand in hand. For me, learning that there are some people who are inherently very uncomfortable with being disabled broke my heart. And that's why I love having these conversations, and that's why I wanted to create this podcast, because I wanted to create a space where you could be like, do you know what, I actually love being disabled. Like I love being disabled, and it's like the best thing in the world. But sometimes you can have a really, you know, you don't have to have an incredible relationship with your disability. Sometimes it can be very difficult. There are challenges, there are problems, there are things that you have to adapt and overcome. But at its base, like I love being disabled. And the fact that I wanted to say that, and I couldn't necessarily find a space where I could say that and people were like, oh, like thank you for saying it, or people weren't shocked, really blew my brain a bit. I was like, oh, like, I'm really happy to be me. Like I don't want two hands. Like I don't want to wake up tomorrow and suddenly find my hand there. Like I would chop it off. And people are like, oh, that's really extreme. And I was like, yeah, it is really extreme, because that's exactly how I feel.
Yeah. I am okay with my body. Like, and that is like, I'm good in
like,
my
I'm
body.
so fine. Like I don't want to clap my hands like you, and that's so fine. Like accept it.
Yes. I hear all of that, and that all resonates with me for sure. And also like just wanting to the idea of also just like wanting to share with the masses. Like I have something that I want to say, and I want you to know about it. Like it feels very pressing and very important to be able to share it and to be able to talk with people. And so I'm so glad you're doing this. Thank you for being a voice. Yeah, of course. Like we need all of us being the voices and, you know, sharing our stories and talking about the good things, talking about the bad things, just like talking about what it is to have the variations that we have. What do you refer to your arm as?
So I don't. So this is the thing, like when I was thinking of writing all of these questions, I was like, I need to kind of like find a way how people refer to their disability, because I do think it's very individual. There is no two people that have the same disability that will refer to their disability in the same way. But I was always like, oh, like, I just don't have a hand. And I was like, and I used to be like, oh, for a bit, I was like, oh, I'm missing my hand. And then I was like, but it's not really missing, because I'm not going to find it down the back of a sofa. So it just doesn't exist. And like, people were like, what do you mean it doesn't exist? I was like, well, what do you mean? What do I mean? It doesn't exist. Like, it's not coming back. It never went. It just never happened.
Isn't here.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, I'm always just like, oh, I don't have a hand. And people are like, you don't
I
have
like
a
that.
what? And I'm like, I don't have a hand. Like, are you okay with that? Because if you're not, it's not my problem. It's yours.
It's your problem. Exactly, that too. Yeah, I think a piece of the like amputee puzzle in my world came about because I like shared with you that was like very much adulthood for me. I think a piece of it was at first I really like hyper focused in on specifically those who had bodies exactly like mine, right? Like hand differences. And that sense of like siloing has expanded into like legs, arms, fingers, like what are you missing? And so there have been a lot of functions and conversations that have happened where it's like, well, I can't say like your hand isn't there or whatever. Like it needs to be like a broader term than that. And I'm pretty sure that's where that like identification of like amputee more strongly came on for me. I don't know, I'm thinking about this out loud in real time with you now. Like, because that wasn't
sometimes it's the best way to process stuff, isn't it? Like real time out loud. Like, oh, I just got to get on with it.
Totally. Yeah. Do you ever call your arm like a nub or
never. I've never ever said that, gone down that route. Like it was always just, I don't have a hand.
I just don't have a hand.
Like it just like isn't there. Like, and I never felt like I had to explain it any more than that, because for me, that's like the end of the conversation, right? That was the end of it. Like if you wanted to know more and we're friends, that's fine. If you wanted to know more and we're not friends, I don't need to talk to you about it. Like
that's your problem.
My friendship circle, like you're like asking for greedy information that I'm not willing to give out.
Yes to that. I wish I had realized and been taught that growing up, because that's what I didn't have. And I felt like it was my job to indulge people as much as they were asking to be indulged. And that is unfair. That's really unfair.
But that also ties in really nicely with my like next question. And that is, I know as disabled people, we can get asked really bizarre and weird, intrusive questions. And I was wondering, is there like a set of questions that people ask you and you're either like, oh, not again, or you're just like, no, stop.
All the time. All the time. Well, yes, I feel like, so a lot of times, I'll have weird encounters where it will be people, I live in the city of Chicago now, so it's a big city. I'm bumping up against a lot of people all of the time, no matter where I go. So strangers will very often try to give me money. That's not unusual. Yeah, they'll like feel sorry for me and want me to have money.
I would take it. I'd be like, oh, cheers, thanks for coffee.
Thank you. Thanks for that. That one still catches me off guard. It usually happens happens once every other year to me. So often enough that it's happened multiple times, but it still always catches me off guard. People who want to like pray over me or talk to me in a really super religious context about my body, which that one used to really super trigger me, but now I understand fully what that microaggression is, and that is purely and fully not my problem. That is them making religion something it absolutely is not, so definitely that one. Little kids very often will be like, no, but where is it? And like they really like can't comprehend that it never was there, just like you were saying. So lots of times in those situations, I'll be like, I don't know, let's go on a treasure hunt to find it. And we'll just like, end up playing tag or whatever, like looking for my hand that we'll never find.
Yeah, it's never coming back. Sorry, babe.
It's never, sorry. Man, what else? And then, well, and interestingly, if I'm wandering around and have my prosthetic hand on, the world interacts with me in a completely different way, 180 degrees different. Yeah. So it's like if I get on the public transit train here in Chicago without my arm on, I get, people will do the double take as they do to our bodies. And then, immediately look away, like, don't talk about it. Like it's like maybe they'll give me a little look of pity, like that poor girl who has one hand, or if not, it's like a hush hush, we don't talk about this on the train, right? But if I walk onto that same train with my prosthetic on, I still get the double look, but instead people want to engage with me. It's like an invitation for people to come up, and pity is almost taken out of the context, and then it's replaced with this weird like technology is cool, you are a robot context, where people feel like they're able to ask questions and approach me when they maybe normally wouldn't otherwise. So it's very strange, but it's people totally different experiences.
That's so interesting. So I haven't worn a prosthetic. I can't even say the word. I haven't
That's
worn
all right.
a prosthetic for, I think I was maybe 5 when I stopped wearing them. So that's like, like the vast majority of my life, I've not worn one. And it's so interesting because for me, like, I don't think I'll ever go back to wearing one. Like, I can't see a point in my life where I would. And I think it's so interesting that people are always so fascinated by like the technology of it. And I'm like, well, what else are you going to use? Like, I'm not going to strap a plank of wood to my arm and be like, oh, it's my hand.
There it is. Look at that.
It's not how it works.
Yeah, seriously. I know, it's really, what always shocks me is like the difference of invitation and a conversation. It's like, it's this weird opening that people take and want to ask you questions about. And so I don't know, it's a really weird bodily thing again, where the body autonomy has to exist too, where it can be a day where, cool, I'm feeling good and I'll talk to you about it and I'll share with you what I do for a job. And then there are days where it's like, don't talk to me, please. I'm just riding the train home today. Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah.
Interesting, because I always like to think that as like human beings, we find it very difficult to pull out a positive attribute about ourselves, particularly through like any form of hardship, and particularly through any form of, like unwanted interaction. If you can pull out like a positive attribute about yourself, not necessarily the interaction, but about yourself, then it's almost kind of been worth it. And I was wondering, do you have a particular positive attribute about yourself that you're particularly proud of?
I like this question. I like your deep thinking. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think, see, okay, I'm going to answer, but I struggle with my answer. I was going to say, I'm old enough to realize that when people interact with me, that I might be the very first person like me that they've ever seen. Therefore, I, in that interaction, in representing all of us, right? And that's a really unfair thing. Like, that's not a hat we should have to wear. That's not a responsibility we should have to take. Like, I should be able to tell the person to F off, and that's a fine interaction to have, right? But I do feel a sense of responsibility to just like the greater us, to leave the interaction feeling like the person did learn something. Like so maybe the positive attribute is I'm comfortable enough to communicate that, like, I'm okay and I am confident and I am proud of who I am, and at least get that very quick messaging across. So in theory, if they're coming across other variations of bodies, like, it won't be something that is scary because the interaction they had with me wasn't. So again, I struggle with that because really that's not a hat we're choosing to wear ever. And that feels unfair to put that pressure on ourselves, but I usually don't mind. I usually am okay to just quickly chat about it and, okay, thanks, this is my stop, I'm getting off the train here, or whatever,
Yeah. And I do think it's very difficult to pull out something positive about yourself. Like, regardless of who you are, you could be like the most positive person in the world, but if you actually turn around and say, like, right, tell me like 5 positive things about yourself, people still get stuck because we don't necessarily appreciate the positives that we have, or we don't necessarily recognize them. And I always think it's good for disabled people to recognize their positive attributes, because so often, particularly shown in the media, we are not shown in the best of light. Or as you said, the light that we get shown in is this heavy inspiration. It's either, you know, big inspiration, oh my god, like look what they can do, or it's this, oh my goodness, how horrific, this man fell down the stairs and lost his legs. That is horrific. But, you know, disability and tragedy aren't, you know, they don't go hand in hand. They're not codependent, they're not interdependent, and we need to kind of break that.
Yeah, we are just like, let's talk about instead the realities of the barriers that we are facing, or let's change what that narrative is. It doesn't have to be a pity narrative. It doesn't have to be a superhero narrative. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm overcoming my disability. No, I am living in my disabled body every day, doing regular things. And yes, certainly it's a part of every interaction that I have, but that doesn't mean that it is my only attribute. It is the only piece of the puzzle about me. Yeah. So it's a really bothersome to be boiled down to that one literal attribute. And just having your body be always just such a talking point, like all the time.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true.
Yeah.
I only have one final question for you. And this is like a super easy question, and everybody tends to answer the exact same. So I already know what your answer is going to be, but I'll ask it anyway. And that is, Nicole, can you say that you are disabled and proud?
Brooke, I would love to. I, Nicole Kelly, am so disabled and so proud.
Oh, yay!
I love it. This is so lovely. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's so cool to meet you. Meet you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I genuinely appreciate anybody who gives up their time for the podcast, because we all live really busy lives, and I really like having conversations with people. And this is a lovely way to get a message out there, have a conversation, and meet new people. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
I agree with that. Yeah. It's so cool really to just be able to, like, just like you said, be able to just have conversation and meet people. And thank you for kind of sharing in return a little bit about your story with me. Like, it's cool. And yeah, I look forward to continuing to get to know you. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I can't wait. But thank you so much for coming on today. I can't wait for this episode to air, and like I hope everyone's enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed talking about it. So thank you so much. Hey.